there is a profound shift that occurs. When love is no longer sought as a remedy for emptiness, but allowed to emerge as a meeting between two whole individuals. Carl Jung understood that what we need unconsciously, we often attract in distorted form. Need creates urgency. Urgency creates projection. And projection replaces reality with fantasy. When a person believes they need love to feel complete, they approach relationships from lack. From that lack, love becomes conditional. Anxiety enters. Fear of loss grows. Jung believed that this is not love yet. It is compensation. True love begins when the psyche no longer searches for completion outside itself. When you stop needing love to confirm your worth, something fundamental changes. You no longer cling. You no longer overinterpret. You no longer negotiate your boundaries for connection. You become selective, not out of fear, but out of clarity. The love you attract from this place feels different. It is calmer, less dramatic, more grounded. There is no rush to define, no pressure to perform. Two people meet not to fill a void, but to share presence. Jung saw this as the difference between attachment and relation. Attachment binds through fear. Relation connects through choice. When love is no longer needed for survival, it becomes an expression of freedom. You do not lose yourself to be loved. You do not diminish yourself to be chosen. You remain whole, and from wholeness, you attract someone who can meet you without consuming you. When love is no longer needed as proof of worth, the nervous system relaxes. There is no longer a background anxiety asking, "Will I be chosen? Will I be left? Am I enough?" Jung understood that much romantic suffering is rooted not in love itself, but in the fear that precedes it. When that fear loosens, perception sharpens. You begin to see people more clearly, not as saviors or threats, but as they are. Chemistry is still present, but it is no longer intoxicating in a way that blinds. Attraction becomes quieter, more discerning. You notice not only how someone makes you feel, but how you feel about yourself around them. Do you feel grounded? Do you feel expanded? Or do you feel smaller, more vigilant, more tense? These signals were always there, but need drowned them out. Jung believed that unconscious need distorts intuition. It turns warning signs into challenges, and incompatibility into obsession. When need dissolves, intuition regains its authority. You stop romanticizing inconsistency. You stop mistaking intensity for depth. You stop chasing emotional unavailability, as if it were mystery. The love you attract now does not hook you through absence. It meets you through presence. There is reciprocity, not perfectly balanced, but naturally flowing. Interest is clear. Communication is direct. Affection does not need to be earned through self-erasure. This kind of love may feel unfamiliar at first. For those who are used to longing, calm can feel empty. Jung warned that when old patterns dissolve, the psyche may mistake peace for boredom. But peace is not lack of passion. It is passion without fear. In this space, love grows slowly, not because it is weak, but because it is real. There is room for individuality, room for difference, room for silence without threat. Two lives do not collapse into one. They orbit with respect. And because neither is needed for survival, both are free to stay. This freedom changes everything. Conflict is no longer catastrophic. Distance is no longer abandonment. Autonomy is no longer rejection. Love becomes a choice that renews itself, not a bond held together by anxiety. Jung saw this as love after individuation, love that emerges not from hunger, but from fullness. And fullness attracts differently. It does not call in those who want to be needed. It draws those who want to meet, not to be saved, not to be completed, but to walk alongside, aware, present, and free. From this place of fullness, the way attraction operates becomes almost unrecognizable compared to the past. You no longer feel pulled toward chaos disguised as passion. Jung understood that what excites us unconsciously often reflects unresolved inner conflict. When that conflict softens, attraction reorganizes. You begin to feel drawn to steadiness, to emotional availability, to people whose presence does not demand performance. This does not mean desire disappears. It matures. Desire becomes less about urgency and more about resonance. You notice how easily you can be yourself around someone, how little effort it takes to stay connected, how natural honesty feels. These qualities were once overlooked because they did not activate the old pattern. But now, the old pattern has lost its authority. You are no longer trying to heal childhood wounds through romance. You are no longer reenacting familiar pain in the hope of a different ending. Jung believed that when the unconscious no longer needs repetition, the psyche opens itself to novelty, and novelty feels calm. The love that enters your life now does not need drama to stay alive. There is curiosity instead of anxiety, playfulness instead of tension, depth without heaviness. You begin to share yourself without the fear of losing yourself. Vulnerability no longer feels like exposure. It feels like alignment. You express needs without apologizing. You listen without self-neglect. This creates a different rhythm in relationship. Time feels less pressured. Milestones lose their grip. The relationship unfolds organically. Jung saw this as a shift from compulsion to choice. When love is chosen rather than needed, it does not imprison. It supports growth. Each person continues to evolve, and the relationship evolves with them. There is no silent contract that says one must remain the same. Change is welcomed, not feared. This kind of love does not promise permanence. It offers presence. And presence, when mutual, is more stabilizing than any guarantee. You remain connected not because you must, but because you want to. And wanting, free from fear, is one of the purest forms of attraction there is. From here, love becomes less about finding someone, and more about recognizing when someone truly meets you, where you already stand. In this recognition, something subtle but essential takes place. You no longer try to secure the future through the relationship. Jung understood that the desire to control outcomes often masks a deeper fear of abandonment. When love is no longer needed for safety, the future is allowed to remain open. You stay present. This presence transforms how intimacy is experienced. Moments are no longer rushed toward meaning. Silence is no longer filled with interpretation. Distance is no longer loaded with threat. You allow things to be what they are. From this allowing, trust grows, not blind trust, but trust grounded in self-connection. You trust that you will notice when something no longer aligns. You trust that you can respond without betraying yourself. This self-trust becomes the quiet foundation of intimacy. Jung believed that real intimacy is impossible without a stable relationship to oneself. When that stability is present, you do not merge to feel close. You remain distinct. Closeness becomes a meeting, not a fusion. Two inner worlds stay intact. While sharing space, this creates a sense of safety that does not depend on constant reassurance. Affection flows without negotiation. Care is offered without debt. You no longer keep emotional score. Giving feels natural, because it is no longer a strategy to be kept. Receiving feels safe, because it no longer threatens independence. In this space, love becomes spacious. There is room for solitude without rupture, room for difference without danger, room for growth without fear of loss. Jung saw this as the maturation of eros, love that no longer seeks to possess, but to relate. And because possession is absent, jealousy loses its intensity, comparison fades, anxiety quiets. The relationship becomes a place of mutual regulation, not emotional survival. Two nervous systems learn to coexist without overwhelming each other. This does not eliminate conflict, but it changes its meaning. Disagreements become information, not threats. They point to difference, not disconnection. From this orientation, love deepens not through intensity, but through continuity, a steady presence that unfolds over time, without needing to prove itself. And in this steadiness, love reveals a different kind of depth, one that does not consume, but sustains. As love settles into this sustaining rhythm, identity within the relationship becomes clearer. You no longer define yourself primarily through the bond. You remain anchored in your own inner life. Jung emphasized that when the ego is no longer swallowed by relationship, the self can remain active and guiding. This means your values do not quietly erode. Your interests do not fade into the background. Your intuition stays audible. You bring your whole psyche into the relationship, not just the parts that seek acceptance. Because of this, admiration replaces idealization. You see the other person's limits, and they see yours. And instead of disappointment, there is realism. This realism creates a different kind of respect. You no longer expect a partner to regulate emotions. You have not learned to hold yourself. Support is exchanged, but responsibility remains personal. Jung saw this as essential for psychological balance. When two people stop unconsciously parenting each other, love shifts from dependency to companionship. This companionship has space for contrast, different rhythms, different needs, different ways of processing life. Difference is not experienced as distance, but as texture. It adds dimension rather than threat. You begin to appreciate pauses, moments where nothing needs to happen, moments where presence alone is enough. There is less narrative, less analysis. The relationship becomes something lived, rather than constantly interpreted. This allows energy to flow back into creativity, into work, into solitude. Love no longer consumes psychic resources. It supports them. Jung believed that when love aligns with individuation, it strengthens rather than fragments the psyche. The person feels more themselves in the world, not less. Confidence grows, not from reassurance, but from inner consistency. You notice that your life expands instead of narrowing. Opportunities feel less threatening. Change feels less destabilizing. Because love is no longer the center holding everything together. It is one meaningful part within a larger, coherent whole. And from this wholeness, love continues to evolve. Quietly, steadily, without urgency, without fear, without the need to be anything other than what it already is. From this expanded sense of wholeness, the way loss is perceived also begins to change. Jung understood that when love is rooted in need, the possibility of loss feels like annihilation. But when love is rooted in fullness, loss becomes painful, yet survivable. This does not make love colder. It makes it honest. You no longer stay out of fear. You stay out of truth. And if separation ever arises, it is met with grief rather than panic. Grief moves. Panic freezes. The psyche knows the difference, because your sense of self is not outsourced. Love no longer carries the burden of holding your identity together. This allows presence to be more sincere. You do not love to secure the bond. You love because it is real in the moment. Jung believed that the ability to love without possession is a sign of inner maturity. Such love does not deny impermanence. It accepts it. And in accepting impermanence, love paradoxically deepens. Moments are appreciated without grasping. Affection is expressed without calculation. You no longer withhold yourself to protect against possible endings. You show up fully, because fullness is already yours. This shifts the emotional tone of the relationship. There is gratitude rather than entitlement, curiosity rather than expectation. The other person is experienced as a subject, not as a role meant to stabilize your inner world. This creates a quiet reverence, not idealization, but recognition. You see the other as a separate psyche, choosing to share space with yours. And this choice, renewed again and again, carries more weight. than any promise made from fear. Jung saw this as love aligned with the self, a relationship that does not replace inner work, but accompanies it. Love becomes something that walks with you, not something you lean on to stand. And because of this, the bond feels lighter, yet stronger, not because it is unbreakable, but because it is free. And freedom, when mutual, is one of the deepest forms of connection the psyche can experience. From this freedom, something subtle begins to emerge. Trust without illusion. Not the kind of trust that assumes nothing will change, but the kind that knows change will come, and remains open anyway. Jung understood that the psyche relaxes when it no longer has to defend an image. When love is no longer used to confirm worth, there is less need to monitor, control, or interpret every signal. Silence does not immediately feel like distance. Difference does not instantly feel like rejection. Space becomes neutral, and neutrality is fertile. It allows each person to move, to breathe, to grow, without triggering anxiety in the other. This is where a different rhythm appears in love. Less urgency, more depth, less drama, more meaning. The relationship is no longer the center of gravity. The self is, and from a centered self, connection flows naturally rather than compulsively. Jung believed that when two people meet from this place, they do not merge. They resonate. Resonance does not require sameness. It requires attunement. You can disagree without rupture. You can be apart without disappearance. Because the bond is not glued together by fear. This also changes how conflict is experienced. Conflict no longer threatens abandonment. It reveals difference. And difference, when held consciously, becomes a source of expansion rather than division. You begin to listen not to defend, but to understand. Not because you are afraid to lose the other, but because you respect the reality of their inner world. Jung saw respect as one of the most underrated forces in love. Without it, passion becomes possession. With it, intimacy becomes sustainable. From this place, love stops being performative. There is no need to prove devotion, to exaggerate emotion, or to dramatize pain. What remains is simplicity, presence without pressure, affection without strategy. And slowly, almost unnoticed, love stops asking for reassurance, and starts offering companionship, not to fill a void, but to share a path. This is why Jung believed that the love you attract, when you stop needing it, is often quieter than expected. But within that quiet, there is a depth that does not collapse. When circumstances shift, it does not promise permanence. It offers reality. And reality, when met consciously, is far more sustaining than any fantasy held together by fear. As this kind of love settles in, you may notice that it does not announce itself with intensity. There is no sudden rush, no dramatic certainty, no feeling of being saved. Instead, there is steadiness, a sense that nothing essential needs to be rushed. Jung understood that when the psyche is no longer hungry, it can finally taste. When love is no longer driven by lack, subtle qualities become visible. How someone listens, how they handle frustration, how they respect boundaries, how they relate to their own solitude. These things would have gone unnoticed before, overshadowed by chemistry or fear of loss. Now they matter. You become less impressed by words, and more attentive to consistency, less captivated by intensity, and more drawn to coherence. This shift is not a strategy. It happens naturally when the nervous system calms. The body itself recognizes safety differently. You no longer confuse excitement with connection. You no longer mistake anxiety for passion. Jung believed that many people fall in love, not with another person, but with the activation of their own unresolved patterns. When those patterns begin to integrate, the signal changes. You stop being magnetized by what destabilizes you, not because it is wrong, but because it is no longer familiar. Familiar pain loses its pull. In its place, something quieter appears. Mutual recognition. Two people seeing each other without urgency, without the need to be everything. There is room for silence, room for individuality, room for contradiction. Love no longer requires constant affirmation to survive. It becomes less about being chosen, and more about choosing, again and again, consciously. This is where commitment changes meaning. It is no longer a promise made from fear of being alone. It is a decision made from presence. And presence is renewable. Each day, each interaction, becomes an opportunity to meet rather than cling. Jung saw this as a sign of psychological maturity, the ability to remain connected, without abandoning the self. From here, love stops asking, "Will you stay so I can feel whole?" and begins to ask, "Can we walk together without losing ourselves?" That question reshapes everything that follows. From this place, love begins to feel less like an event, and more like a climate. It is not something you fall into. It is something you inhabit. Jung believed that when inner alignment is present, relationships stop being used as solutions. They become expressions. You are no longer relating from a wound, but from a center. And this center does not demand proof. It allows pauses without panic, distance without drama, change without collapse. You begin to sense that affection does not need to be constant, to be real. Connection does not need to be intense, to be alive. This is where patience appears. Not the forced patience of waiting to be chosen, but the natural patience that comes when nothing essential feels threatened. Time no longer feels like an enemy. You are not measuring moments to determine where you stand. You are present within them. Jung saw this as a deep form of trust in life itself. When love is no longer central to identity, identity becomes stable enough to love. From this stability, vulnerability changes. You share not to secure attachment, but to be known. And being known no longer feels dangerous, because your worth is not on trial. This allows honesty without collapse. You can say, "This hurts," without fearing abandonment. You can say, "I need space," without fearing disappearance. Needs become communication, not weapons. Boundaries become clarity, not rejection. The relationship becomes a place where growth is allowed, not managed. And because growth is allowed, it does not need to be forced. Jung believed that love matures when it no longer tries to hold the other still, when it releases the fantasy of control and accepts the reality of movement. Two people are always changing. Love either adapts consciously or breaks unconsciously. From this conscious adaptation, something rare begins to form: companionship. Not dependency, not fusion, but the quiet strength of walking alongside another human being, without needing to define the destination. This kind of love does not shout. It does not beg. It does not promise eternity. It shows up, again and again, not because it must, but because it chooses to. In this way, love becomes less about intensity, and more about integrity. You begin to notice how alignment feels in the body. There is less tension in the chest, less urgency in the thoughts, less need to rehearse conversations before they happen. Jung believed the body often knows when the psyche is no longer divided. When you stop needing love to rescue you, your nervous system softens. You are no longer scanning for signs of abandonment. You are no longer interpreting every shift as a threat. This inner calm changes how you relate to uncertainty. You no longer demand guarantees. You allow unfolding. And unfolding requires tolerance for the unknown. Earlier, uncertainty felt unbearable, because it echoed old wounds. Now, it feels neutral, not comforting, not frightening, simply open. From this openness, curiosity replaces fear. You become interested in the other person, rather than preoccupied with how they see you. You ask questions without agendas. You listen without preparing defenses. Jung saw curiosity as a sign that projection has begun to dissolve. When projection fades, the other person is no longer a symbol, but a reality. And reality is complex. It includes contradictions, mood changes, limits. Instead of reacting to these as disappointments, you meet them as information. Information about who the other person actually is. This shift deepens intimacy. Not the intoxicating intimacy of fantasy, but the grounded intimacy of truth. You begin to feel that being understood is less important than being real. And being real requires courage. The courage to disappoint. The courage to say no. The courage to remain present, even when things are unclear. Jung believed that love reaches depth when neither person sacrifices their inner truth to maintain harmony. Harmony without truth becomes stagnation. Truth without care becomes rupture. This form of love learns to hold both. Care without self-erasure. Truth without cruelty. And slowly, this balance reshapes how you see connection. Love is no longer something you chase, or something you fear losing. It becomes something you participate in, moment by moment, choice by choice, not driven by need, but guided by awareness. And awareness, once established, continues to refine how love is lived. As awareness deepens, you may notice that love no longer asks you to abandon parts of yourself in order to belong. You do not shrink your thoughts to avoid tension. You do not exaggerate your emotions to feel seen. You do not silence your intuition to maintain peace. Jung believed that whenever love demands self-betrayal, the psyche pays the price later. Resentment grows quietly. Distance forms beneath closeness. The body tightens even when words say, "Everything is fine." But when love arises from inner fullness, self-betrayal feels unnecessary. You bring your whole self into the relationship, not as a demand, but as a presence. This changes how attraction functions. You are no longer drawn to potential. You are drawn to reality, not to who someone might become, but to who they are willing to be now. Jung understood that many people attach to unrealized futures, because it allows them to avoid present truth. But present truth is where intimacy lives. From this place, love becomes less romanticized and more reliable. Reliability does not mean predictability. It means emotional consistency. You know how the other person shows up. You know how conflict is handled. You know how repair happens after rupture. These things create trust, more deeply than passion ever could. Trust grows not from perfection, but from repair. Jung believed that the ability to repair is one of the highest forms of psychological maturity. It means neither person needs to be right at all costs. It means the relationship is valued, without being idolized. This balance allows mistakes without catastrophe. You can fail, apologize, learn, and continue. Not because love is fragile, but because it is resilient. And resilience changes everything. You stop fearing the end, not because it cannot happen, but because you know you can survive it. This knowledge does not harden you. It softens you. You become more available, not less, because availability is no longer a risk to your identity. Jung saw this as the paradox of mature love. When you no longer cling, you can finally open. And when you open without clinging, love flows more freely than when it was bound by need. From here, love is no longer a solution to loneliness. It becomes a meeting of two lives that are already in motion. And motion, when shared consciously, creates a bond that does not rely on fear to hold it together. And this is when it becomes clear what Carl Jung was pointing toward. The kind of love you attract, when you stop needing it, does not arrive to save you, to fill you, or to complete what is missing. It arrives to walk beside you, not because you are empty, but because you are present. This love is not built on urgency, but on choice, not on the fear of loss, but on the capacity to remain. When you no longer seek validation, you become authentic. And authenticity is deeply attractive, because it does not try to persuade. It simply is. From this place, love stops being a desperate search, and becomes a shared experience. Two lives moving together, not to escape themselves, but to meet each other with greater clarity. Jung understood that a true bond is not born from the need to be loved, but from the ability to love, without losing oneself in the process. And when you reach this point, the length of a relationship no longer defines its value, because you no longer give yourself up as the cost. The love that arrives then does not consume you. It does not confuse you. It does not fragment you. It reflects you. And in that reflection, for the first time, you recognize yourself as whole.